Hey Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. Today we're setting up our brand new 10-bay ASUSTOR NAS with 160 terabytes worth of these drives. That's right, 10, 16 terabyte drives. So without further ado, let's jump in, put it together, see how fast this thing goes and all of that jazz, and then we'll chat a little bit about the specs and all that as we go too. Let's get right into it. ASUSTOR sent over the LOCKERSTOR 10 Pro AS7110T. It's a Xeon powered NAS with a quad core Coffee Lake Xeon. It's the Xeon E2224. It boosts up to around 4.6 GHz. So for a NAS, this is actually quite interesting. The AS7110T supports up to 10 SATA or SATA drives. They can either be 2.5-inch SSDs or 3.5-inch spinning Rust drives, and each drive it supports up to 18 terabytes per bay, which gives you a total of around 180 terabytes of total raw storage. Now in our configuration, we've got 10 16 terabyte drives, so we're going to be doing 160 terabytes in our configuration. Each of the 10 drives slides in via a hard disk sled, and it's got a quick button release and a lever to pull the drive out and slide it out. The drives mount with screws like any other drive sleds, and to reinsert it, you just push it and clip it right in. Now, this has a 10 drive SATA backplane, as you're seeing in this clip here, so you can see everything that's going on internally inside the chassis itself. Each drive has a combined power and activity light, and also a light to let you know if there's a drive failure. And while we're on the front of the enclosure, there is a USB 3.2 Gen 1 port on the front of the enclosure, which is for one-touch backup solution. So if you wanted to plug in an external drive, you can configure it so you can plug it in there and press the button and it will send all that info to an external hard drive. On the back side of the enclosure, there is a 10 gigabit Ethernet connection, 3 2.5 gigabit Ethernet connections, and also 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports as well. You can use this for expanding it out, which will allow you to expand it out to a total of 22 drives with 396 terabytes of raw storage if you wanted to go down that path. Now this NAS is for small business and medium business and enterprise usage. You have to have a very specific use case to be using something like this at home, because the enclosure itself can get quite expensive, and we're going to come back and touch on that a little bit later on. But while we're up the back, let's pull the 3 screws out to reveal what's inside, because this does actually support RAM expansion. So in the configuration that you're seeing here, we've got 8 gigs of DDR4 ECC SODIMM memory. You can take it all the way up to 64 gigs over 2 slots if that's what you wanted to do. There's also 2 M.2 slots supporting drives up to 2280 long. We're going to be installing some M.2 drives for this video and for this configuration, because this NAS is actually going to become part of our workflow. For M.2s, we're using 2 Seagate IronWolf 480 gig drives. We're going to be using this for SSD caching. The drives actually mount quite easily. You don't have to do anything special. You just slot them in and use the included thumb screws to screw them into the slots. So it's good that this part is toolless. As previously mentioned, yeah, we're using Seagate IronWolf 510 SSDs, and both of them are PCIe Gen 3x4 drives, and they're 480 gigs a pop. Some other things to mention as well is the front LCD screen. This is great for just giving you a couple things at a glance, and it can be fully customized in the admin panel as well. Obviously this is before we put disks in it and before it's got an IP address, because it's got no network connection. There's also 4 buttons that allow you to scroll through some menu settings and change settings without actually having to use the web interface for configuration. We'll just take a quick look at the menus. This is the main menu set up here. I'm not going to dive into this because you can actually see what all of these are in the manual if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, you can even do the one-touch backup from the front screen that I mentioned as well. Now you guys know what this is, what it does, what it can do, and all of its specs and all that jazz, but Yeah, that's all well and good, but it ain't no good if we don't fill it with some drives. So let's fill it up. I already showed the installation process for the M.2 drives in the top when we went through all of that stuff, but let's get into putting these drives in. We're doing 10 of these 16 terabyte IronWolf NAS drives from Seagate. Special thanks to Seagate for hooking up all the storage for this project. This NAS, if I was to spend money on it, would have probably cost about 15,000 Australian dollars. That's right, 15 grand. These drives are very expensive, but yeah, anyway, let's put them in. Okay, first drive, slide her in. Ooh, that feels good. Ready for the click? Oh, ooh, number 2. Ready for the click again? Oh, baby, that is so sensual. Oh, another one, number 3. I'm not doing this in any order, by the way. I'm gonna show you that it doesn't matter. Oh, baby. Ooh, better fill the bottom holes up. Yep. Oh, hear her click. Oh, last hole on the right-hand side. Oh, oh, oh yeah. Ooh, feel her slot in. Now that the drives are inserted, the NAS will ask you to initialize the drives and delete all the data. You can skip this if you like, but I'm just gonna go through and show you what happens when you do it. Once you do it, it'll give you an IP address and you'll be able to log into the admin panel. The default username and password is admin and admin. So once you're in, it's gonna basically be like any other NAS or any type of web interface, a bit of licensing stuff to agree to. This has a nice little welcome screen showing you what you can do on the NAS. There's a link to one of our other ASUSTOR NAS videos in the top right-hand corner right now that'll show you this from a fully cleaned setup. Now, we haven't actually configured anything here either, but I was tinkering around with this NAS a few days ago, so the initial welcome screen stuff and all that is now just hidden. But at a glance, we just zoom through all this. It basically just shows you what you can do in the admin panel, like services for NFS storage and all that kind of jazz, and for using AFS for Mac stuff. All right, let's click on the storage manager so we can see what happens with the default configuration here if it asks you to configure it on that front screen, because that's exactly what we did here. Now, all the drives, or the mechanical ones rather, are allocated to a RAID 5 volume. What we're actually going to do in this video is I'm just going to show you that all the drives are healthy. They're all functioning correctly. We're just going to zoom through this next part. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to remove the volume. That's right, we're going to remove what we just created because I want to change the file system. There's a few little things it's going to ask you here. It's going to ask if you want to do a quick setup, you want to maximize the capacity of this type of storage setup. These are good little questions to ask if you've never done it before, but obviously we're going to be going advanced setup. We're going to be using RAID 5 because I've got a few spare 16 terabyte drives. This sounds absolutely ridiculous, but we do have a couple spare, so if we have any failures, we can swap drives out very, very quickly. Let's just hope we don't get 2 failures, but this isn't a backup system. Remember, RAID is not a backup. This is just for our working environment. What you want to do is select every drive to add it to that big volume, and we don't need any spares in this setup whatsoever. Now we want to use ext4. Now the reason why we're not using ButterFS is ButterFS has way too much overhead, and ext4 gives us the fastest raw performance with the file system, and that's what we need because we're going to be editing with this. Now, as you can see here, this is the final configuration, and just double check that everything is correct. We're going to smash finish, and we should be good to go. Now, the provisioning of this partition and this RAID array will take time. It can take up to 24 hours depending on your configuration. Ours took a few hours to let us pass the next screen. Now, I'm not going to sit here and show you how long this took because this took absolutely ages, but yeah, once it's done, it'll show you that the RAID volume is now synchronizing. This means it's expanding the volume across all the drives, making sure everything's in check, making sure all the parity and everything's all nice, and everything is good to go. And as you can see here, the total capacity is 130 terabytes of usable storage, and it's ext4. What we're going to do now is use those 2 M.2 drives for SSD caching. We're going to set up a read and write cache. Now this will accelerate both read and writes to the array, and this is something we're going to want to do because we're going to be using this for video editing. And all you want to do is select both of the drives, hit next, and select skip sequential IO. It really doesn't matter in this. We don't need sequential read and write performance. we need it to be fast across the board, which is why we're going with this configuration. Once you're done setting that up, click Finish, and yeah, we should be good to go. Now, the next stage is, it takes a little bit of a while as well, but we're gonna zoom right through this. I think this is like 2000% speed, so you can see how quick it actually is. So it's mounting the SSD cache drive, and it also needs to synchronize it once it's done to make sure it will work correctly with your RAID 5 array or RAID 6, or with whatever RAID level you're going to be using if you're using this type of storage. Once we're back in Storage Manager, you can see in the bottom that both of the M.2 drives are now provisioned, and they're synchronizing that cache with the rest of the array. And that's basically it. But what you also want to do, just take this into account, is you'll want the whole array to synchronize over time. So it will take about 24 hours to get it up and running at its maximum potential and speed. But yeah, that's basically it. A couple other things you might want to look at doing is changing the host name of the NAS itself. We usually name stuff after things from Final Fantasy VII, so we're going to name this Nibelheim. It's a place in Final Fantasy VII. If you've played the game, you'll definitely know where Nibelheim is. Click apply and you're good to go. For the network configuration, we're actually not going to dive into this in this video because our network setup is quite complicated. We've got a couple VLANs and it's just too much to go into in this type of video for a general purpose type of setup. And what we're going to do as well, we're just going to turn on the CIFS file share or the SMB file share, just so we can dump a couple things on the drive and do some CrystalDiskMark tests to show you guys how quick this thing is once it's fully set up and configured. Speaking of speed, let's do a bit of a speed test. As you can see here, the volume on the ASUSTOR NAS is a 130 terabyte volume. I've mapped it as wide drive. If you open CrystalDiskMark not as administrator, you can actually select network shares. What we're going to do is just run a 1 gig test. We're going to run that 5 times. And you can see here that we're basically fully saturating the network link. So we're connected via the 10 gig link on our test bench and the NAS itself. We do have some 10 gig networking gear here, so you can see that. I'm just going to speed this up so you can see it complete all of the tests. If you look at the graph on the left hand side in Task Manager, you can see that it correlates with the throughput through the network with the disk read and write activity speeds. Now this is actually quite a good way of measuring this stuff at a glance. Okay, let's change it up a bit. We did a 1 gig test. Okay, we get it. It's fast. But what if we do a 64 gig file size, which is a much bigger file size, and let's see how that performs. So to save ourselves a little bit of time, we're going to switch it to a single test, 64 gig with the same queue depth, just so we can get this test done a little bit quicker, because 64 gigs is a lot bigger. And as you can see, if you had a look at the graph on the left, the network speed will correlate with the throughput for both read and write. So what we're seeing here is we're actually getting the advertised speeds for network throughput with 10 gig with this NAS. So it's not just some random claim that ASUSTOR made, we're actually getting it, which is very, very impressive. There's quite a few things that we didn't end up covering in this video, but I'll quickly just talk about some of those things now. Now, with ASUSTOR, they have like an app store, so you can install other apps on the NAS. So it's not just for storage. You can do other stuff like run a Plex server, which is pretty helpful if you've already got a massive media collection. You can dump it on your NAS. You can get the NAS to do all of the encoding for all the other devices that are viewing the content on your network. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier on in this video, this type of NAS solution is very, very expensive and definitely not for everyone. There's other things you can do as well. You can install Docker on it, so you can run little containers for different things. So if you're a software developer and you need to have like different environments for different things, you can spin up Docker instances really quickly. You can also run VirtualBox on this too. So if you want to run a full fat VM, you can also do that too, as well as the Linux station, I think they call it. And it's basically like Docker, where it runs the single Linux kernel and you can spin up other instances of the Linux user space on top of the base kernel. So there is quite a lot of interesting stuff you can do. But again, like I've said a couple times, it is a very expensive solution. If you've got a small business or a medium-sized business that needs something like this, especially with the 10 gig Ethernet, I would absolutely recommend it, especially because something like this, with the feature set and the amount of storage you can put in this, it sounds crazy for me to say this, but for business, I think it's pretty much on the money. It's one of the more affordable solutions on the market for this type of density for storage, because you've got to remember, this enclosure is not very big. It is densely packed, and 180 terabytes of raw storage in something that is probably a little bit bigger than a football is, yeah, quite compelling. With that said, small business, medium business, and even some enterprise use, this thing's feature packed and it can do heaps of stuff. The AS7110 is definitely something to look at. For a home user, probably not so much, because the enclosure itself, unless you can afford it, right? So if you can afford it, I would recommend it. Yeah, the enclosure itself is $2,500 US, or around 35 to around 4,000 Aussie dollars. In the configuration that I showed in this video, you're looking anywhere from 13,000 to 15,000 Australian dollars. Now, for us, a solution like this is quite unaffordable. We don't have $15,000 to drop on storage like this. So with that said, like, yes, ASUSTOR sent over the NAS. They didn't pay us a cent. They sent over the NAS. We got drives from Seagate to fill it all out so we could do this video as well. Special thanks to Seagate and ASUSTOR for hooking this stuff up. But I gotta say, they didn't pay us a cent. So if it was bad, I would have told you it's bad. And the only reason why we agreed to do this in the first place is ASUSTOR sent us a NAS 2 years ago, and I've been using that NAS every single day for 2 years for almost everything you see on the channel. Yeah, and that's why I said yes, because I already trust the product that they sent us a little while ago. And they were like, hey, we want to send you a bigger one now because you're probably running out of space and stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, I do need more storage. So something that costs around 15,000 Australian dollars for a YouTube channel like ours, and you might think that we're massive, but it's just two of us, and yeah, it's a lot of money. Now, I just wanted to touch on something as well. I used to work in a data center. I worked mainly with storage. If you have a setup like this, this is not backup. Do not use RAID as backup. We can afford to have a drive fail because we've got hot spares, so we can just drop a drive in and we're good to go. But guys, please don't use a solution like this to back up mission critical data. We have an rsync to another server that syncs to another server. We've also got everything duplicated to Google Drive and some offsite storage as well. We've got a pretty good backup setup. But guys, yeah, like I said, don't spend 15 grand and expect this to be your be all and end all for storage, because that's not what this is. This setup is for high speed local storage if you don't want to have it inside of your machine that all of your workstations can connect to, or all of your computers in your house or office can connect to. The 10 gig link for this, for me personally, is the best thing, because the older ASUSTOR NAS that we have has dual 2.5 gig, which is okay, but and even when we first started using that NAS, it was slower than what we needed. Now, it's really, really fast. I'm not even making this stuff up. You guys can see the results from the testing we did, and the reason why I screen recorded the testing is so you could see it happening live. This thing is properly quick. All right, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit of something, like any type of morsel of information. That was really the point of this video, just to show you guys a basic setup for this and what we're going to be using this for. I'm gonna come back with another video and show you how we actually drop this into our workflow and show you the differences that it makes on our network as well. We have a massive network upgrade happening at the moment. I've got a bunch of networking gear I need to provision still that we're just not ready to provision. Let me show you one of the things. You guys are gonna have a bit of a giggle. Okay. Oh. All right. So I still need to provision this Juniper switch. This is like 10 gig Ethernet and 10 gig fiber, and yeah, it's a complete beast. It's an absolute monster. I think yeah, this is quite an expensive switch. My cousin donated this to me, so thanks Carl for donating this to me, but we'll be provisioning this out soon. And yeah, mainly fiber. It's gonna be really good, gonna be really interesting. Anyways, I'm done here. If you like the music you heard here, I make all the music. It's available on Patreon. If you wanna get early access to videos like this one, we're over on Floatplane. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peak we seek, and there's links to everything that I talked about in the description down below. I'll try and put together like a price list for everything so you can see how much something like this would cost. Yeah, we could never afford to buy something like this. It's ridiculously crazy. So I'm very grateful that we get to do like this as a job, and then when we expand, that companies reach out and they're like, hey, we want to help you expand. So yeah, again, special thanks to ASUSTOR and Seagate for making this happen. It's been a really big weight off my shoulders to have a bit more storage to edit with, because my editing PC on the daily is hooked up to 64 terabytes of storage through iSCSI, and it's pretty full at the moment. So we've got like 200 gigs left, and we just did this as well. Might not have seen this on MainByte, but we just upgraded to the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, the one with the flippy screen. We're shooting everything in 6K with 8:1 compression. So you can imagine how much storage we're blasting through. A single SSD on the camera now, so 500 gigs is about 40 minutes of footage. So yeah, you can see where this is going. Thanks for watching.